All right, Michael, welcome to Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks, Daniel. Great to have you.
How are things going? What's going on?
Things are great. I joined Island a little over a year ago. I came from SentinelOne before this. I was chief cybersecurity evangelist before that, co-founder and CTO of a company called Nitro Security before we got acquired by McAfee in 2011, before they destroyed my product in 2018. But all that to say that I've been in cyber, in network security, cybersecurity, both as a builder, as a practitioner, for the last 30 years, going as far back as network engineering for a company called Cabletron back in the 90s. Just watching it evolve has been a tremendous experience.
Yes, super cool background. That's further back than me, I think, actually, by a couple of years. Well, I'm super excited for this conversation because I got to see another partial demo of some of the stuff. And I could barely keep up with the notes because I was like, what is the use case? What's the problem that we're solving? And I want to get into that with you, but it was like, there are so many spaces to me, like cybersecurity spaces that are taken care of by this product. It's honestly one of the most impressive security products I've seen in years. It's just absolutely insane. So can you start with just the high level overview of what Island is and I guess what problem it's trying to solve?
Yeah. So I like that you point out that it's a cybersecurity product and it does address a number of cyber use cases. What most impressed me and the reason I joined this organization a little over a year ago, one was the velocity of innovation that I saw. I had seen a demo of it 8 months prior. It was amazing. And then I saw it 8 months after, and just the number of things that Island was able to identify, recognize as customer pain points. And the important thing is it's not all just cybersecurity use cases. When we talk to customers, the stakeholders that see value range from cybersecurity to data protection to governance, IT and infrastructure, now with AI, talking about shadow AI and AI governance. There are so many use cases for the product. And what we've been really good at doing is identifying core use cases that were foundational to the browser and then moved beyond to adjacencies. So as a base level of understanding, 5 years ago, the founders of this organization looked at the fact that the majority of knowledge workers today are spending most of their time in a SaaS app or the web front end to a legacy app, but inevitably they were getting the majority of their work done in a browser. But we looked at the fact that they were using a consumer browser to do it, and we thought there are some challenges here. The attack surface that a consumer browser gives to an adversary, is highly exploitable. The fact that we're constantly surrounding the consumer browser with this endless tech stack of technologies, some to protect the device on which the browser is operating, some to perform backhaul and break and inspect. And then we've all been beholden to this very fragile and very vulnerable extension management ecosystem, which, we were made well aware of this past Christmas with the Cyberhaven event. But, that was not a one-off concern where even a legitimate extension could be compromised. We also love to point out that even legitimate extensions like Grammarly is a great example. Grammarly, for all intents and purposes, is a keylogger, right? It's capturing our keystrokes, sending it up to a cloud instance, evaluating it, and then pushing a verdict back down. That might be perfectly fine when you're crafting a personal email. May not be okay if you're sitting inside your ticketing system, your ERP tool, right?
Yeah, it's a really good example because Grammarly, it's so innocent sounding. We're fixing your spelling in Grammarly.
Yeah.
And to your point about the browser is so central to everything. So it's like, if you were in the browser and you could fix spelling and grammar, how are you going to do that? You have to capture everything. Yeah, a lot of hidden sort of things like that. So sorry to cut you off.
No, it's a really good call out. So when we envisioned what an enterprise browser would look like, we first looked at the gaps or deficiencies in what consumer browsers we're doing. And obviously, when you're building a new technology that is browser focused, you don't start by writing your first line of code. You start by standing on the shoulder of giants in the Chromium world, and you take what's already been built, you evaluate it for the capabilities and efficacy you're looking for. And of the 35 or so million lines of code in Chromium, we decided to deprecate about 40% of it because it was either consumer grade code, it was not built secure by design, it was not built for an enterprise. And when you take 40% of the Chromium code out, you'd be surprised how much bandwidth you have free to pump back in all of the enterprise class capabilities. And from our perspective, it starts with trust. And it's an enterprise trust, which means you have to be fully authenticated into your customers' existing identity platforms, whether it's Entra, Ping, or Duo workflow. And so through the authentication process, you not only get your authorization and policy, but you also through SCIM get group membership, application entitlements. So it's really easy to target a given policy to a given user based upon identity. But then we expand that concept of enterprise trust into what's called an application data boundary. And we like to describe it as this secure enclave inside of which your business applications are operating and outside of which you can't move data either intentionally or unintentionally. And that goes to everything from cut, copy, paste, file, print, save, screen capture, all of those things. And once you put applications that are sensitive inside a secure enclave and can govern the way data freely moves back and forth, you can actually reduce your data protection policy. I had a customer that had 12,000 atomic DLP rules. It was everything, from this to that in this condition. We deployed and they were able to drop that down from 12,000 to under 200 atomic rules, because if you believe that if application A and application B are both trusted, they're both inside that secure enclave, you're more freely able to allow them to share data back and forth without running the risk of potential leakage outside of that boundary. And then when we looked at adjacencies, so cybersecurity use cases are the common ones, right? And that's everything from governing extension usage based on category or risk, doing a continuous dark web scan for leaked credentials, keylogger protection, anti-phishing, anti-malware. Those are the obvious ones. But then we also looked at the capabilities that were being delivered by MDMs and other agent-based technology that do device posture assessment. And so we decided that device posture is so important to understand your security policy and drift that we baked it into the browser. So every 60 seconds or every time you switch tabs, we do a full device posture assessment. We're looking at everything from the status of your full disk encryption, the status of your firewall, your screen lock protection. Is your EDR and EPP tools installed and up to date? And the cool thing is the verdict of that device posture assessment will drive a dynamic policy. So if the posture comes back and says, full disk encryption's turned off, maybe then you enforce you're not allowed to save any data to your file system. We're going to force all file save actions, all print PDF actions to a secure storage of your choice. Or maybe it's a use case for BYOD or contractors where you're trying to onboard these users and provide access to business applications and data, but you don't want to run the risk of leaking data by people printing or saving or even taking screenshots. Maybe at that time you redirect everything into secure storage, which goes to kind of our DLP strategy.
Okay, so ultimately what we're talking about is like a secure working environment. Is that right?
Yeah. In fact, we've stopped just calling ourselves an enterprise browser. We are an enterprise workspace because it's not just controlling applications that live in the browser, but we also realize there's still a large population of users that still are dependent on desktop applications. And the best example is an accountant or somebody in finance that says they can't use the PWA version of Excel because they're not allowed to install all the plugins and macros that they're able to on their thick app. So they said, we need this concept of the application data boundary to go outside the browser. And so now we can actually add thick apps to that application data boundary and extend that data loss protection coverage out to locally installed applications that users are still forced to use.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I've heard a number of spaces already. So we kind of have like remote access. We have the posture checking to make sure that you can actually use this from like maybe a shared laptop, or a lot of people are VPNing in from some untrusted laptop at home, and maybe the kids use it for games as well. Like, not an ideal situation, but it happens. So you can do policy-based control of what you can and cannot do based on the state of the security of the actual host, right?
Right.
Then I heard DLP as well. So that's like, what can you get in and out of the environment? What else do we have? We've got other spaces as well, right?
Yeah. So let's actually talk about that remote access for a minute. Several years ago, the idea of ZTNA delivered by a SASE or an SSE vendor was meant to provide two really important things: identity-driven least privilege access and network microsegmentation. You heard about the identity-driven piece, right? Tied into your IDP means your policy is governed by who you are and what privileges you have in that situation. Microsegmentation kind of follows the same path of the way remote access used to be provisioned. Was you stand up VPN gateways, you give your users a VPN client, and then you dial in, essentially to that platform. The problem is you're getting access to the entire subnet that's been granted or reduced, but the attack surface and the blast radius is still quite large. So ZTNA was all about, let's provide a unique tunnel for an application used by a user and make that microsegment as small as possible. One user, one tab, one application, host, port, and protocol. So when we looked at the cost and complexity complexity that most of our customers told us they still had in their environment from VPN usage, or the poor user experience that many of our customers were telling us their ZTNA agent has, whether it's ZTNA brownouts or application traffic that can't pass across those environments. Things like HTTP3 and QUIC don't route well across those. And then you add the fact that as we're getting closer to post-quantum encryption ciphers, the ability for SASE vendors to do break and inspect is being reduced every single day.
Yeah.
We said, look, if the user we're managing needs to access a host or an application resource that sits back behind your corporate firewall, whether that's a brick and mortar data center or a cloud data center, could we build the facility in that steers traffic to a termination point that lives inside the customer network? So almost 2 years ago, we introduced what's called Island Private Access. And essentially, it's a set of private access connectors. The customer will stand up behind their firewall. That makes a secure reverse proxy connection to the Island fabric. And then the end user, when he fires up the browser, a background service will also make that connection into the Island network. And so when the application that they're trying to go to is hosted internally, it would steer that traffic on ports 80 and 443 through the Island network into that facility. Earlier this year, we expanded our concept of Island Private Access ZTNA, not just for web apps inside the browser, but remember I mentioned we added thick app support and data protection outside the browser. We also added network routing outside the browser. So now, because we have a background service that runs alongside the browser with kernel hooks into networking, even a thick app, when it makes a connection request to a host that sits inside your firewall, you can now steer that traffic without having to fire up a VPN client, without a ZTNA agent. We intercept that traffic and send it across our fabric. Now we've got cyber use cases, data protection use cases, networking use cases.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's the type of thing you almost like, even on-prem people, for additional security, you might even want them to use it.
Yeah, in fact, the cool thing about a user who might go back and forth between on-prem and remote is we'll do validation checks and say, are you on net? If so, there's no need to jump out and hairpin back in, right? Maybe just apply data protection policies, device posture assessment, but we're not going to steer that traffic because that would add unnecessary hops. And what we're trying to get away from is this multi-hop environment that SSE vendors have forced their customer traffic through. Also with cloud outages like we've seen recently, if you're not multi-cloud, you've got some exposure to gaps of connectivity as well. And then the other cool thing is from a disaster recovery perspective, what happens if some catastrophic failure occurs and it kicks one or more machine offline? Maybe some vendor releases a patch to their EDR that bricks 7.5 million machines and a blue screen of death. How would you recover? Would it require a truck roll? Would it require a field service tech going on site to make, hands-on keyboard fixes? Would you have to stand up a VDI session temporarily? What if you could just tell that user, go grab your iPad or go to Best Buy and get a $200 Chromebook, install this one application. It's a Chromium-based application, which 5 billion other people have downloaded it. My grandmother has downloaded and installed Chromium products, right? Because it installs largely in user land space. It's a single executable. And the minute you authenticate into the Island browser with your existing corporate creds, you have your entire business workspace for you again. This solves 3 really important use cases. Rapidly onboarding new knowledge workers and getting them to work fast. M&A, if you were engaged in an acquisition or you're acquiring a company, how quickly could you onboard the people and resources and applications and hosts of that new company? Would you have to ship new laptops or re-image the ones they have? What if you could just send them a link that has them create a new account in your IDP and download and install a single application, and then they authenticate in, they've got access to all of the tooling with governance aligned to it. And then the DR one, we talked about that. Every other organization I worked for in the past, the first question they asked me after I signed my offer letter is, are you a Windows or a Mac guy? Because they're going to buy that asset, ship it to central staging, install the gold image of the operating system, install the applications they think I want to use, then ship it to me. Then I'm going to install the apps I really want to use, fire up a VPN client or ZTNA, and I could be days or weeks away from getting to work. But I signed that at Island. They said, we're going to send you an email inviting you to our Okta domain. The minute I authenticated in Okta for the first time, I had one application tile. It said download and install Island, which I did, and I was up and running in 15 minutes.
Wow. Okay, so we got onboarding here. So this is what is blowing my mind about this application. It's like, I'm trying to think of like a CISO's job or even the head of IT. It's like kind of a CTO scope in addition to a CISO scope. What are all the different problems that I'm constantly having to deal with? You just mentioned another one, which is onboarding. How quickly can people spin up? And of course, that involves, the shipping, the logistics of the laptops or whatever. But in this case, that would be agnostic because it would be inside the browser. So we're talking about a secure browser that's that's doing all these different things. Can you open it up and just, I really want the audience to get a pitch of like, just kind of understand the full scope of it. Because it's like, oh, wait a minute, is this IT product? Yes. Is it security? Obviously, it does a bunch of different things. But at first, when this space first started, it was like, it's just a remote browser because you're looking for a few different abuse cases or vulnerabilities in browsers that you're trying to solve. And that's what it was. But that was just a lot more.
Yeah. So this is a slide that is so dense that I don't normally just show it all at once. This is a build that kind of talks to everything. So I talk about the fact that, it's a Chromium-based product with a background service in the operating system. It's built for both managed and unmanaged use cases. It can enable a BYOD as well as a contractor or third-party use case. We now have versions for every major operating system, every major mobile platform, every major thin client. And if you still have a religious attachment to your existing consumer browser, we have an extension that you can install in Edge, Chrome, Safari, and soon Firefox. And then I build it out and talk about the different stacks.
Sorry to interrupt real quick. Just want to make clear the thing you just said. It can be the browser itself or the application itself, which is the custom browser. But you can also do, how much of it is it most? You could also do most of it through an Island extension inside of your existing browser.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even require that you actually use the Island browser.
That is correct. We deploy in multiple modalities. One is full browser replacement, where you're going to mandate or enforce through things like IDP conditional access or certificate bidding, making sure that it's got to be the Island browser. Then there's the mobile version in iOS and Android. Then there's the kiosk mode, if you will, which is just kind of everything boots right into Island. But then there's the extension. And of everything you see on here, I would say we've got about 85 to 90% feature parity, where all of these capabilities, or the majority of these capabilities, can be delivered solely through an extension. And the advantage is, of course, the friction that a full browser replacement, might be for some users. That might be a threshold too high, but it's super simple to deploy an extension quietly.
And maybe there could be a transition plan of like, for a while there's the extension and then you get on the browser, depending on what the org can tolerate, right?
Exactly. And the most important thing about the extension is it gives you full visibility into every interaction the user has with applications, how data is flowing between them. The best way to determine your first target use case is to put the extension everywhere and then use the telemetry that you learn from that to know exactly what your high-risk applications are, what the high-risk behaviors are that your users are performing. Where's file activity taking place? Where are people copying and pasting from and to? Because once you know that, you know where to target your effort on your first use case.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I imagine you could build your policies based on the logs of that visibility, right?
That's exactly right.
Real quick, I don't know if you heard about this thing. There's this AI thing. It's brand new. A couple of people are starting to talk about it. One of the big use cases is like, okay, the board and everyone's telling us to use AI, all the things everywhere, right? So marketing, all these different people. And then, of course, you have the different services, right? You have OpenAI, but you have Anthropic, you have Google, and a bunch of others. So if there isn't a lot of governance around this, they'll just go and start using their favorite, right?
Right.
So the question is like, is there anything here around, look, you're only supposed to use this one. This is the one where you have like the approved corporate policies on the back end for like what could be stored and blah, blah, blah. So is there any way to sort of like gateway or proxy or just make sure we all are following the AI policy for the company?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Daniel. So 5 or 10 years ago, we were all worried about shadow IT, right? Identifying sanctioned versus unsanctioned applications. That's now spanned into shadow AI. And
there it is. I see it now, yeah.
And then once you align your data loss policy to the interaction, you've now got AI governance. You've got the ability to not only steer users to the AI models that you want them to use, but you can also put guardrails around it to make sure that even the acceptable interactions with AI still don't put your corporate data at risk. And this comes really importantly in a couple of ways. One, we are tenant aware. So we know if you're in Gemini public or Gemini private, and we will have different policies about how you're allowed to interact.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So what you're talking about is kind of like a universal corporate, I guess, information security. It's a pretty broad scope, a set of policies that just kind of apply. And then your baseline is working inside of this secure browser, and it's kind of able to shim and see what's going in and out, which means those policies can include AI policies. Therefore, if somebody is using AI, it will know to apply those. Is that right? Is this just kind of like a unified set of policies that's intelligent enough to know based on the host, based on use cases, based on if it's a thick client or a web app or whatever, just kind of activates the stuff that it needs to use for that particular context.
That's exactly right. And I think the concept of unified policy is what's also allowing us to look at this burgeoning field of new AI tools and applications and AI browsers and saying, regardless of what your access method is to AI, if you can build one policy that kind of rides on top of all of them, or maybe is under all of them, when you control the last mile, when you control the presentation layer, you have the ability to apply a policy against any application.
Oh yeah, that's a great one actually. So let's say there's a hot new AI browser out there, and suddenly say it's a small org and they can move fast. They decide, hey, this is our new official browser, and it's Chromium based or Firefox based or whatever. One thing I'm really worried about with the AI browsers is like parsing is the worst thing for all of security. It's just the hardest thing to do. Guess what a browser is? A giant parser. And guess what works really well is prompt injection. We have parsers. Walk me through the popular AI browsers being used. You install the extension and they come across like a prompt injection sort of thing. Is there a way to say, first of all, is there a way to like stop it or notify on it? Second of all, if it were to happen, would the DLP stuff kick in?
Yeah, that's a good point. So a couple things are in play there. With the extension installed into any Chromium-based browser, the majority of the new AI browsers are, in fact, Chromium-based, which is helpful. We have the ability to govern the same things we do in the Island browser: destination-based filtering, restrictions on what data can move in on both file uploads as well as prompt windows. I'll show you an example of this, in a minute. I'll give you the demo. And then data redaction on the response. So if a user asks a question and the response from the LLM, whether it's a private LLM or a public LLM, if it contains PII and the user who's logged in that current configuration should not see PII, then even the response information that's coming back can be redacted to protect sensitive information. The other important aspect of that is a full audit trail of all prompts and responses. So you can now feed that into a BI tool and learn more about kind of the way people are interacting with your AI tools or public AI tools to build a better policy. So it's not just about governance, so it's also about visibility to be able to define better policy.
See, this is what kept happening. And this is happening again now with this conversation. Like every feature that you're talking about, there are like dozens of companies fighting in that space. And you guys are implementing it really well as just kind of like, oh, look, we have this feature. That feature is like entire companies, entire sets of companies competing in that space. And it's just like a thing that you get when you have this unified, like secure operating environment. The other thing you mentioned that was really cool is if a particular user, like the system, it seems like it doesn't really care if it's an AI response or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's something coming back to the user. And then the question is, what is that user's policy? Again, going back to unified policies, that user is not supposed to see salary information. That user is not supposed to see PII or whatever. It doesn't matter how they're getting it from like a thick client or a web app. Is that right? That filter is going to work regardless?
So I would say that thick app data redaction is going to be kind of this long tail of support, right? We started early with things like the Microsoft Suite, those tools that are already built as PWAs now, things like Slack and Teams, which are just PWAs anyway. We can easily do those. When it gets to anybody's thick app at the presentation layer, there's still some work to be done. But
that's right, because it depends on that protocol. So it's going to apply to most thick apps because most of them are going to be inside the big ecosystem that you cover.
Right.
But if someone makes some random thick app with some random protocol, I mean, that's not something you just instantly like get into, which makes total sense.
That's correct. The other really interesting one, when you talk about adjacencies and it just makes sense to do it in the browser. We decided this earlier this release. So probably about a year ago, we introduced our first implementation, what's called digital user experience. And it just makes sense. And to your point about there are companies that just focus on that. You've got companies that do APM, application performance monitoring. But the way they do it is by generating synthetic tests from a POP to an app and then averaging the results and telling you what the app response time is. When you're the browser and you have visibility into everything happening at the DOM level, everything happening at the network level, you can actually generate unique per user application performance metrics from the end user's perspective right inside the browser.
How it actually feels versus some random metric.
But more importantly, because the background service also has visibility to the device, we can also look at things like CPU utilization, memory utilization, Wi-Fi signal strength. And we can pull both sets of telemetry together when you're investigating a problem, because it's not always the app team's problem to solve. Sometimes it's the desktop team. Sometimes the right answer is Dawn needs to move closer to her Wi-Fi hotspot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the most important thing too is, I mentioned we are tenant aware. That's a really important thing to handle application data boundaries because, a outlook.com for my personal email looks exactly the same as outlook.com for my business email domain wise, but the tenant that I'm logged in as is different and it knows that boundary. So I'm also showing you that we're also multi-profile. I mean, this is great for shared use devices, kiosks, and I've got multiple users I can log in as, each one with their own associated policy and still govern data boundaries between them. So I'm going to log in once as a privileged user. I'm calling it my admin. You can also see that we're able to splash things like an acceptable use policy and with whatever frequency and cadence you want. This is an auditable action, by the way. Me clicking that has told the organization that I will abide by your rules. And then I'll log in simultaneously as a slightly less privileged user. This is now a contractor. So I've got two different users logged in right now. Notice the application entitlements are different for each one. The more privileged user has access to not only SaaS apps, but also internal applications.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I'll show you those in a minute. Hosting of AVD resources, hosting of W365 or M365 tenancies. And one thing we recently added is this enterprise communication. This allows you to build and deliver bespoke messaging directly to the end user where they're doing their work, which is their homepage. You can deliver to a single user, a group of users based on project, a group of users based on domain membership or SCIM groups. You can do all of that.
Oh, interesting. So you're like talking to the workforce. You could say, hey, there's a new policy update. There's a whatever, an all hands meeting, whatever.
That's exactly right. Now,
cool.
The simplest use case to show off is probably the most well-used SaaS application out there. I'll show you Salesforce. There's a couple things. When you control the presentation layer, and this is important because the browser sits at the natural termination point of encryption. After the data gets decrypted, but before it gets shown to the user, we get to scan it at the presentation layer before it builds the DOM. And that allows us to add things and take things off the screen. I've chosen to add a subtle border here that tells you you're in a business app, you're being monitored. I chose to add, it's hard to see on this white background, but there's a black hat logo right here. There's a QR code that I've superimposed. And you're also seeing our ability to inject credentials using our privilege access management, which is native to the browser as well. This user doesn't know the credentials, but those credentials are being injected on their behalf. Now, when you can add things to the screen via a robotic process automation, you can also remove things from the screen. The one thing you're not seeing on the screen is the little eyeball that normally sits right here that says reveal password, because I don't want to allow that user to unhide the password that is now redacted. So I'm going to log in over here.
This watermark thing is pretty cool. Is that for like the ultimate stealing use case, which is the phone?
No,
like
I'll show you that use case in a minute. That's even different yet. Side by side, I'm logged in, one as a privileged user, one as a contractor, logged into the exact same tenant of Salesforce, the exact same case in Salesforce. And if you look over here, notice that somebody has chosen to put PII in a text field. Might be perfectly fine for the user that actually has to process a credit card payment. But notice the contractor has a slightly different user experience. We've identified PII. His policy said that in your current situation, your condition, your persona, your device posture, whatever, we've decided that you should not see PII. We don't control Salesforce or the data that lives in it, but we control the way it gets painted on the screen in the last mile, and we've been able to redact that information. Now, as an option, this is all policy driven. If a user clicks here, I can give the optional ability for them to unredact that information. Again, you don't have to, but I've chosen to allow this user to unredact it. But watch this. If he tries copying this information to his clipboard, that will be blocked because it knows I have credit card information in the copy buffer. If, however, I had only chosen to copy this part, that's perfectly fine.
Oh, wow.
Now, we built a secure clipboard, and that clipboard holds the last 50 things that I've copied. Now, that's great, so you're no longer bouncing back and forth between web pages, copy, paste. Easy. But watch this. I'm inside a business application like Salesforce. I have full access to everything I copied inside that application boundary. I'm going to also open up Outlook, which you can see I've also defined as a business application. That's why the little yellow border. And so if I were to come over here and create a new email and paste it, perfectly fine. I'm copying it from an application that's protected or safe into an application that is also within that application data boundary. But if I were to go over to my personal Gmail and try pasting it, notice my copy buffer buffer has all gone redacted because I can no longer paste data from inside the boundary to out, right?
Interesting. So it's tagged that clipboard item with like a source.
That's exactly right. It is both content and context aware.
Interesting.
One more use case, let's talk about spear phishing. All right. And for that, let's go to Box. Now, this is a use case that it's practical for both spear phishing prevention as well as shadow IT. So if I decided that, OneDrive is my corporate application for file storage, I'm going to an unsanctioned application. If I try putting any email address in that's in my domain is islander.guru. The minute I hit the last letter of my domain name, it says, no, you're trying to use a corporate credential outside the application data boundary. Now, this is a simple shadow IT problem, but this could also have been a website that I was lured to that's trying to harvest my credentials in a phishing campaign. All right?
Yeah, okay. So if you're trying to input that in, that could have been going to any destination, regardless of what the UI looked like.
That's correct. And the important thing is, because it's at the presentation layer, we've been able to determine that violation before that content is posted in HTTPS to the web. We're not relying on a POP to intercept that, break and inspect, and then figure out it's a violation. It never left the machine.
Yeah. That's an advantage of being in between in the browser. That's really cool.
I'll show you one more presentation layer trick, and that is, let's go to Grok. I've chosen with my web gateway policy to let people know this is a warn, right? This could be a block, a warn, an on approval, or an allow. And you can see here that I'm saying that, you're going to a potentially risky website, make sure you don't put corporate information in. Let's say they forget and they try to upload a file or even type PII in. Credit card. Again, the minute it sees me trying to type information into any prompt window, if it's outside the data boundary, it's going to tell you you're trying to put PII somewhere you shouldn't.
Interesting. And if you were using an approved one, would you still get that redaction thing when it comes back?
So if Grok were my corporate standard and I was signed into my Grok tenant, then no. Then that would be an acceptable policy because I've controlled where the LLM's being trained from. It's not going to harvest that information for anything outside my business usage.
That makes sense. I'm saying, what about the user policy if they're not supposed to see PII?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. So if I had put a prompt in that whose response contained PII, it would have the exact same redaction. And just to prove that this works on any website, I'm going to go to a public website called DLP Test. And I go over here to sample data and notice that even in this web page, it's been able to say, I saw the classifier for social security number or credit card. And again, I can choose to allow this to be unredacted if I want. And then, by the way, that will be re-redacted in 10 seconds to prevent, let's say, shoulder surfing or whatever.
Could that be part of a like an approval flow?
Absolutely.
Yep. So you can ask for permission to unredact.
Yes. And then you could put a time window on that redaction. You're allowed to see it for the next 30 minutes. And then one last cool use case that I'm going to show you is GitHub. I've called it suspicious. It's not. You could ignore that. But I'm going to go ahead and sign in to my GitHub instance. And over here, I'll do the exact same thing. Sign into the exact same instance. I'm going to go into the exact same repository, right? Over here, I'm in a repository called XDR Tech in the settings page. So let me go over here to XDR Tech and I'll go to the settings page. Now, in GitHub, there's a thing called the danger zone, right? It's where you can revoke permissions, transfer ownership, delete the repository. For a privileged user, fine. Over here, I'm a contractor. I've chosen to put a little banner up here. I've also chosen to make this portion of the web page read-only.
Interesting. So application level filtering that are specific to the web apps.
That's right.
Interesting. Okay, so let's zoom out here. Who's the buyer? I guess the question is, I guess that depends on who in the org has the ability to and has the interest and the care to actually secure all these different things in a single container.
So when we look at the common use cases for the enterprise browser, obviously delivering a secure SaaS environment is critical for every organization. Others are trying to solve this problem, right? How do I enable my third parties, my contractors to be able to access my applications without shipping them laptops? How do I ensure their device posture is what it should be and they're accessing it securely and they can't exfiltrate data out intentionally or unintentionally? So this is a huge use case that typically most customers say their first use case is either trying to enable a BYOD strategy or a contractor third party. Roughly the same use case is an unmanaged device that I want to apply policy to. So that's one. It's just standard application user provisioning. The infrastructure team looks at it from a VDI reduction perspective. And I didn't show you this in here. And also this kind of also talks to zero trust, but you should see how easy it is So I'm back to my privileged user. Remember, he had access to more things than others. I'm going to launch my RDP client. Now, this is going to show you both in-tab RDP as well as ZTNA, because I'm sitting in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I don't have a VPN connected anywhere, but this host sits behind my firewall in the Dallas data center. When I connect, it's going to fire up a full remote RDP host. So I'm now remoted into this box. I have full file transfer still baked in that goes through our DLP engine and our malware scanner, and I can now interact with this. So what we typically find on customers that have large Citrix deployments or other VDI, they look at the fact that they've given that for the purposes of a contract or a third party or a very highly sensitive app access. But if that user's landing in a VDI session and then launching a browser and then hairpinning back out for 60, 75% of their business access, which is still SaaS, then that just became the most expensive browser you've ever deployed.
Yeah.
But if you could look at the resource utilization of that host and say, all browser access can be facilitated by the end user, policy evaluation and enforcement takes place there, and I can still provide this native experience to give them access to a host when they need one without ever leaving the browser, complete with data loss protection, complete with last mile controls. You see, I still have my watermarking and everything else. Then you can start reducing the dependence on that massive black box or bare metal or even, cloud hosted virtualization environment. So there's our zero trust.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so adopting AI, we saw that one. Bring your own device. That one's pretty clear. Talk to me about the DRBC one. What is that?
So this was that use case I mentioned about rapid onboarding. This kind of comes back to this user onboarding efficiency. If there were some catastrophic failure, how do you get users back online?
Oh, gotcha.
Easy. You pick any other machine you have and you install one application and you now have safe, secure access to the entire workspace. I do a demo where I take the dirtiest machine possible. It is riddled with malware, keyloggers, info stealers, crypto miners, and I prove that you can install Island. It will carve out this secure enclave, and all activity that takes place within that is completely safe. Now, in order to do that, and this is why an extension-only vendor, no matter who it is, will always have problems because there is still a very large attack surface underneath in the Chromium code where they store their cookies, the hashes they use for encrypting passwords. All of those things are well known to adversaries and can easily be bypassed. When we forked the code, we intentionally hardened the underlying code base of Chromium. We don't even run in the same memory space. We encrypt everything in memory and on disk with post-quantum ciphers. So we've done a great job of making sure the application itself is secure, right down to building, a self-protection module for it. So even in a dirty environment or as needed, my machine crashes. I go grab my son's gaming machine, right? I don't know what else is on that machine, and I probably don't want to know. But I know that I can carve out this little moat around the applications I need to access and guarantee that data doesn't leak in or out, and making sure that adversaries don't have an attack surface they can target.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so zero trust, that one makes sense. Mergers, acquisition, and divestitures, that one in enterprise modernization. Talk us through those two.
Yeah, so I mentioned M&A earlier. This also comes back to that user onboarding. If I acquire a company, how quickly could I get them onboarded? Just like as if they were a brand new employee, I'd be able to onboard an entire organization overnight by just delivering a single application.
Yeah, so onboarding goes into the onboarding.
It goes on to onboarding. And then divestiture. How quickly could I deprecate access to my applications, right? With one button.
Yeah, so basically all those users in that group, you just change the policies for them.
And then enterprise modernization, I'll say, is kind of a vague conversation to have, but it kind of follows the path of a great example, zero trust. If you were deploying zero trust 10 years ago, you knew the vendors you could go with, you knew the architectures they supported, and you pretty much signed up to living in their ecosystem. If you were building a new environment today, whether you've never gone down the ZTNA path before, or you have and you're looking for an alternative, I would argue that anybody looking at ZTNA for the first time today shouldn't be looking at the legacy traditional way of doing it. There are all sorts of problems with those environments. I don't normally show this page in its fully built out form, but again, you've got the user experience that's never fantastic. You've got network outages and hookups that cause problems. You've got the challenge of post-quantum encryption. In a simpler way of doing it, because policy evaluation and enforcement is all done locally, all your internet traffic goes direct. If there are uncategorized or risky websites, block them or, instantiate RBI, which is just a feature in our product, not an entire product like other vendors. And then for all application traffic, whether it's web or thick, that's privately destined for back here, only that traffic goes through, but we're not beholden to break and inspect. And that's an important thing. So it's super easy to deploy. I'm not worried about managing multiple agents and VPN proxies and everything else. It's pretty straightforward. So when we talk about modernization, that's probably a great way to think about it. The other is cost consolidation, vendor reduction, the complexity of having to manage a dozen different vendors to do all of these things. The modern way of doing it is to think about it as a platform.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're basically taking all those different features and functions that need to be done at the Zero Trust to do all those functions, and it's just in the browser instead. Right. And the whole break and inspect thing, you get that naturally because you have to decrypt to show it to a user.
Exactly. So of all the SSE capabilities that really make up what we're doing, ZTNA, remote browser isolation, secure web gateway, you're going to start seeing more, and CASB, like all of those are built into the platform now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how everyone isn't talking about this. I guess they are, right? Because I do hear about it quite a bit, but this is just like extraordinary. It's like, it seems like the product marketing team must have a real challenge on their hands. It's like, what exactly are we? We are so many things we could talk about. We have so many options to talk about in terms of like what we actually do, right? It's just incredible product. Anything else we should know about? Anything new coming out soon you're excited about, or any recent things?
So, you can't have a conversation today without going deep into AI. I think I showed you some of what we're doing with things like AI protection, AI governance. We're going to be coming out with agentic AI capabilities native in the browser. So being able to define and train specific skills that can then be shared and orchestrated to perform repetitive tasks for knowledge workers.
Interesting.
You're going to see enterprise AI, which is kind of the centralized location that we think all AI interaction should take place in, because again, it will be governed by one policy that you define across all application usage. And the cool thing about that is you can steer users to a specific LLM. You can steer them to a specific model within that LLM if you want to. Maybe you've got statisticians that really need the expensive models that the new guys are coming out with, but you wouldn't want to give that model to everybody doing general purpose AI searches because you're going to burn down your tokens so quickly. So maybe general purpose AI gets the less expensive models, and your high value users, they get to use the other ones. But because you're governing both what they can access, how data is being delivered, what information you're allowed to feed into it, and then redacting information on the way out if it's inappropriate, really provides kind of this one-stop shop for AI access in a safe way.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I talk about this thing called unified entity context, where it's all in one place. And that requires a lot of filtering because you have to know who's asking, what the context is. Like, are they allowed to see that result? And if the data is all mixed together, then that gets difficult. But again, you have the filter point because you're in the browser. You can see that. So you're saying all those other policies would apply to that as well, that context management.
That's exactly right.
So when are you guys talking about doing this? When is this supposed to come out?
So our AI rollout is kind of a journey for us. AI protection is out there now. Agentic AI later this year. Enterprise AI a little after. And then a full AI browser you will see us coming out with as well.
Oh, wow. It'll be a different one or the same and just it'll be built into the browser?
Same functionality, same policy, but built into a purpose-built AI use case browser. So think a lot more drawers coming out and providing you guidance on the right and heavily interacting with the data that's on the screen. The other really cool thing is when you have a privileged access management solution built in, you no longer have to seed credentials to the agent. It can simply use the credentials that are being provided to you, just like I injected credentials to an application. I can provide measured credential leases to an AI tool.
Oh, I was going to say, so the agents themselves, you could have the same logging and visibility that the users have.
That's correct.
Oh, that's really cool. All right. Well, this is really cool, Michael. Appreciate the demo. Appreciate the conversation. Where can people learn more about it?
Daniel, thank you for spending some time today. Go to island.io. There should be a button there to click, request a demo. We do proof of values with customers all the time. And one of two things happens. You get multiple stakeholders in a room and no one wants to take that first step forward, or you get multiple stakeholders and everyone's fighting over who gets to be first. So those are exciting times.
Awesome. Well, good chatting with you and talk to you soon.
Daniel, thanks so much. Bye.